Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be looking at Dele Farotimi's book, Nigeria and its Criminal Justice System. And, it's really something. It's not just theory, it's personal. You really get pulled in.
Yeah, his own story, like from childhood to his disillusionment with law, is woven throughout. You get a human perspective on a system that can be so impersonal and overwhelming.
Right. And he doesn't hold back. He names names, details specific corruption he saw,
Yeah.
even his experiences with police brutality, which adds a whole other layer.
Yeah, and what's striking is how he ties this all in to the history and politics of Nigeria. He's arguing that the system is kind of designed to benefit those in power at the expense of everyone else.
So let's dig into that.
Yeah.
He starts with his childhood, talking about his grandmother,
Yeah.
this super respected figure in the community. She'd often settle disputes, like he saw her as fairness and justice
Right.
personified.
That's key, right? It sets up his whole view of justice. Like he saw it in action personally, way before any courtroom, and this obviously shaped his choice to pursue law, like that passion for what's right.
Exactly. But then she hits the Nigerian legal system, and it's a reality check. Those ideals clashed hard with how things actually worked.
And then you get the Gbatamosile 2 land dispute. Complex case, but it really shows the systemic issues that plague the Nigerian justice system.
But tell me about it. Massive piece of land in Lagos, fraudulent judgments, ignoring legal procedure. It's like a case study in how power manipulates the law.
Right, it hinges on this deed of conveyance, basically the document that proves you own the land. Gabatamosi Group claims they have a deed for land belonging to the Alutu family, but there's no proof it's real.
Wait, so they're claiming ownership based on a document that could be completely made up?
Exactly. And even more messed up, this claim goes through the courts, all the way to the Supreme Court. And initially, they award some of the land to the Gbatamossi Group, admitting the claim might be shaky.
So the highest court validates a potentially fake claim.
It shows the lack of accountability, the power dynamics. And get this, they later revisit the case, flip their stance. Not only do they acknowledge the flaws in the first judgment, but they increase the land awarded to the Gbatamossi Group.
So they went from a questionable ruling to an even more questionable one. It's like the system thrives on confusion and loopholes.
It's a textbook example of how lack of transparency and impunity erode public trust in the entire justice system. And this is where Farotimi's experience with judges like Oyeken Abdullahi comes in.
Right, she was the judge at his wedding, but also, later in this case, issuing a warrant for the Gbatamossi Group to take possession of the land.
Interesting, right? How personal relationships can get tangled up in legal proceedings, especially in a system that's already corrupt, raises questions about impartiality and conflicts of interest.
It's like these connections create a web of influence, where it's hard to separate what's legitimate from what's driven by personal gain.
And then you've got figures like Afe Babalola, prominent lawyer for the Gbatamossi Group. He straight up admitted in court there was no legal basis for their initial claim.
So he's basically saying, we don't have a valid claim, but give it to us anyway.
Exactly. And then there's Lowell Pedro, the Solicitor General of Lagos State. He was supposed to represent the state's interests, but ended up backing this shady claim.
Talk about a conflict of interest.
Ah.
How much of this is legal argument, and how much is powerful people pulling strings?
Right. Farotimi calls this out, how it undermines the whole legal system.
And this is where his disillusionment starts.
Yeah.
Seeing this level of corruption, even being personally targeted by Faye Babalola with a libel suit, that had to take a toll.
Oh, absolutely. It was a clear attempt to silence him, to stop him from speaking out. This is a good point to move on to his experiences with police brutality and corruption, which really solidify his decision to quit law. It's important to get this. Police brutality in Nigeria, it's not just like random incidents. It's baked into the system, this culture of getting away with anything, no accountability in the police force.
Yeah, he tells this story, getting pulled over for no reason. They wanted a bribe, and when he said no, they threatened to plant drugs in his car.
Classic move. Corrupt cops using that to extort money. Shows the power imbalance. Citizens have zero options when this happens.
And it goes beyond bribes. Farotimi talks about facing police brutality firsthand.
You mean when he saw those officers beating a young guy in public? He tried to step in, and they turned on him, threatened to arrest him?
It's scary to think about. Just trying to stop violence, he becomes the target.
It shows how lawless it feels. No protection for regular people. And these police encounters, on top of his legal disillusionment, really pushed him to his limit.
There's another incident that really highlights the two-tier justice system in Nigeria. Farotimi talks about a time when he was brought before a judge for acting as a surety for a church member.
Oh, yeah, the one accused of financial stuff who skipped the country.
Right. So Farotimi gets held responsible for the debt, even though he was involved in the crime.
And it's even crazier because in the same courtroom, there's a young woman sentenced to prison for forging a document. Basically the same thing the church member did.
Same crime, completely different outcomes. Really shows how money and connections get you different results.
A pattern, right, throughout the book. Farotimi gives tons of examples of the rich and powerful seemingly above the law, while ordinary people are trapped in a rigged system.
He even mentions judges openly asking for bribes from defendants to get favorable rulings.
Shocking, but sadly, not unexpected. That kind of blatant corruption destroys the whole idea of justice.
And the worry is this lack of accountability spreads. When people lose faith in institutions meant to protect them, it creates fear and distrust.
Totally. That distrust can lead to more lawlessness, making it even harder to fix the system.
A vicious cycle. Corruption fuels distrust, which then lets corruption grow even more.
Exactly. And Farotimi doesn't see this as just a Nigerian thing.
Meaning, he sees this corruption as something that could happen anywhere.
Exactly. He argues that unchecked power corrupts any system, no matter how it's structured or its supposed ideals. And he ties this to Nigeria's history, saying how colonialism and its legacy contribute to the power imbalances.
Important point. It's not just bad individuals. It's understanding the historical forces that shape these institutions and create fertile ground for corruption.
And that leads to his decision to leave law. He got to a point where he couldn't be part of a system that was so broken.
He talks about feeling like he was always compromising his values, turning a blind eye to what was wrong.
And it's not defeat. It's a powerful statement. Refusing to play along with a system he sees as unjust.
It's almost a challenge to those still in the system to fight for reform, to uphold justice, resist corruption.
A good way to put it, not giving up. Finding new ways to challenge the status quo and demand better from those in charge.
So what does this all mean for our listener? Why should they care about how the Nigerian justice system works? It can feel so distant, you know. But what hits hard about Farotimi's book is that it speaks to this universal truth about power and how it corrupts.
Right. Specific context is Nigeria, but the themes, they're global. It reminds you that these systems, legal, political, whatever, they're made by people. And where there are people, there's potential for abuse, for putting self-interest above everything else.
He talks about how the powerful create systems that benefit them, even if those systems end up hurting the very people they're supposed to help.
Yeah, and he doesn't just blame. He criticizes how these systems are built, how they make inequality worse and block justice for those without money or influence.
Reading this, I kept thinking about systems closer to home, wondering how much of what Farotimi describes is happening in different ways all over the world.
That's his point. It's not just Nigeria. It's about recognizing that corruption can happen anywhere power is concentrated and there's no accountability.
So what do we do with this knowledge? The book's pretty bleak. Is there any hope for real change in systems like this?
That is the question, right? His story might seem discouraging, but I actually think it offers a bit of hope. What he's really calling for is a change in how we think.
Like recognizing the problem, admitting these systems aren't perfect.
Exactly. And once you see the problem, you can start fixing it. It begins with awareness, education, understanding how these systems work and where they're weak.
He talks a lot about speaking out, challenging things, refusing to be part of injustice, even if it's risky.
Takes guts, yeah. But it's also about collective action. People demanding accountability from leaders, supporting reform groups, holding each other to ethical standards.
So it's not enough to just change laws or structures. It's about changing the culture, the mindset, how we view power and responsibility.
Exactly. Long-term project for sure. Needs persistence, resilience, believing change is possible, even when it feels impossible.
Farotimi leaving law, some might see it as giving up, but I think it's a powerful protest. He's saying, I won't be part of a system that's fundamentally wrong.
And that itself can spark change. It forces people to see the flaws, to question assumptions, to think of alternatives.
So what do we say to our listener who might be feeling overwhelmed by all this? What's one concrete thing they can do?
First step, educate yourself. Read Farotimi's book. Look into other stuff on corruption and justice reform. Talk about these issues.
And remember, change takes time. It's a process. But every bit of awareness, every conversation, every effort to hold the powerful accountable, it's a step forward.
Never underestimate your voice. Speaking against injustice, even in small ways, it can have a big impact.
This has been a fascinating look into the Nigerian criminal justice system. What we really want our listener to take away is that this isn't just about Nigeria. It's about seeing that any system can be corrupted and that we have to demand accountability and justice wherever we are.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us. We hope this gave you some new things to think about and maybe even inspired you to get involved.